right, looks like we've got two people in here. Good afternoon, guys. I'm gonna give everybody just another minute or two to hop in. so it looks like we haven't had anybody join with any questions, but we did have one pre-submitted question, so I'm not sure if they're going to join just a little bit late. But I figure I can go ahead and cover that, so give me just a second. Let me switch my screen here. All right, so we should be looking at decisions. So the question is we're having difficulties with the sub dialog button updating a grid list after removing a record from a database. So it looked like the question that they had was, we have a data grid that we have on a form, and we're looking to select either one or multiple items and then remove those from the list of items and remove them from the database that we have, and also update that form all in one. So this is a pretty quick setup. So I went ahead and created just a quick example here just to show how we can do this. So I've got two flows here. I've got a create data flow, and this is just for my own data structure that I created for this. And then we have a data grid flow. So if I go ahead and run this, we have a fetch entity step that's going to fetch from our data structure that we have, and then we have just a quick form set up. So if I run this, we see we have two entries here, and I'll create a couple more once we test this a bit further. But if I go ahead and select, I have this set to just single select. If I hit remove item, we can see that it removes. It's pretty quick. And we can do that for, it might not like that I remove everything, but let me go ahead and create a couple more rows here. So this is just generating a random first and last name and creating an entry for it. So now we're going to have a bunch of entries. So I want to delete Jake. I can go ahead, I can remove that, and we still see the rest of the list here, and that also removes it from the data structure. And we can tell because each time we fetch, or each time we pull this up, we're fetching directly from that structure. So this is pretty quick to set up. If we jump into this data form, this is a sub dialog button that we have set, and we have use legacy disabled. And what this is going to do is, if you've used active form flows before, when we use an active form flow, we get this new column down here called form rules. And we can also see that we have access to a whole bunch of things on the form. So we can clear validations, we can enable controls, hide things, do all sorts of fun stuff. Not only that, but we also have access to the form itself. So if I want to say I want to change value, which is what I'm doing here. So the sub dialog is set up to where we pull in the selection, and we can see that here. So we have from the form data, we pull the selected item by its ID. So, we selected Jake last time when we deleted it. We pulled the ID from that row, and then we went ahead and deleted that. And then we do another fetch. So we pull the data back from the database now that we've updated it and deleted that one particular row. So we perform a fetch here, and then we have just a create data. And then the create data looks at this type, which is a list of our data structure data. And then we have this set to change value down here. And what this will do is this is set to form data, dynamic data grid, and then item source. And so this is going to change the source of that data grid data that's coming in. And that's where we get that update from. So I can go ahead and I'll not save this. I'll do another quick debug here. Say we want to delete Caden. We go ahead and remove the item. We can see that that sub dialog ran. So we deleted the item. Yeah, we're not going to get anything here. We've now refetched these. We can see the name is not in the list. And then we go ahead and update the data that we have there. So pretty quick, easy example. Looks like the participant that asked that still hasn't joined, so we'll give just another few minutes, but if we don't have any other questions, we can probably wrap this up.
Hey, Ethan, I do see we did get one quick one in from Manal about deleting accounts completely in decisions, user accounts. Oh, no, well, maybe Manal, no one was speaking, so maybe you don't have to leave.
Sure, yeah, let's see. Any way to delete the counts completely in decisions? Let's see if we can. Yeah, so that would really depend mainly on the use case. Like there's definitely a couple ways that we can delete it. We can obviously just manually go in and right click an account and delete, which is the easiest way. But if we want to mass clear them out, that's definitely something, we want to look at the use case a bit more on how we want to approach that. But there are definitely ways that we can do that.
Manal, just there you go. Perfect.
Hey Ethan, I was just trying to so we're doing some SAML testing and I have some accounts that I wanted to just take them out completely and have a job that runs and brings on new accounts. But whenever I even delete the account, it kind of stays in the database. So I was wondering if you guys have like a specific query or like a specific database, like table relations that have to be deleted first.
For accounts specifically, they live on just one particular table. So we can delete them via query. And obviously, we want to be careful running any sort of deletes
Mhm.
on that database. But yeah, it should just be the entity account table. Let me go ahead and switch this. Go ahead and pull query editor as well. All right, so we should be looking at a couple accounts that I have created. This is just a couple AD accounts that I was testing with for a different issue. But what we can do is we can copy this email address. I believe it's email address. Let's go ahead and copy this. All right, so we have this account here. So this should be the only table that you should need to touch if you want to just hard delete them. So the delete query would be pretty quick. So it should just be and then if we do another select, it's gone. So if you wanted to do something like that, that is a way you can approach it. And like I said, we want to be cautious on running any sort of deletes on the database. So I definitely, I always recommend just taking a database backup before we run any sort of delete queries or anything. But always just test first too, and just see if you can do some selects to make sure that you're actually pulling in the data that you want to do. But that is one way that you can approach it. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Because whenever I did like a regular delete, when I do hidden and delete report, it still shows the account and the person was just able to log in without any issue, which is weird because I deleted it, but I guess I have to do the hard delete for their account so I can really test it.
So you said these were SAML accounts, right?
These, yeah, these are SAML accounts. Mhm.
Gotcha. So with a SAML account, what it's going to do is each time you actually log in through SAML, you're going through your identity provider. I think you guys were using, it was Azure, I think.
Yes. Hmm.
But yeah, and this goes for any SAML provider, but what's going to end up happening is when you hit that identity provider, they're going to send a request to decisions, and it'll run that process to recreate that account. And so it was deleting, but as soon as it says, hey, this account doesn't exist, but we know this user can authenticate, and the IDP is the one that handles that authentication, it's just going to recreate that account every time, or in this case, undelete it. But yeah, that would be expected behavior.
Hmm.
So yeah, even if you do like fully delete that account from that table, it's still more than likely going to just recreate that account unless we revoke their permissions on the IDP side.
Got it. So, Ethan, just a random question. So I don't need, because I created a separate schedule job just to create the accounts
Hmm.
and update the accounts. So you can have, I know with Samuel you cannot have AD. So I don't need the job. Either way, as soon as somebody logs in, they will always have an account in with
Yeah, so
Samuel.
here, let me,
Mhm.
if I jump in, I should have a SAML provider set up. So give me just a sec to make sure I don't have anything on here that's
Mhm. You can-
shouldn't just throw up there. Tell you what, I'll go ahead and just create a new one here. All right, so I'll go ahead and just create another one. So if I click add here, so this is me editing my identity provider. So if we scroll down a bit, you can see that we have a run flow that's set. So each time decisions recognizes like, hey, we don't have an account for this particular SAML account that just tried to log in, and we know that it logged into the IDP. Like at this point, we've logged in through Azure or whoever your IDP would be.
mhm.
Then it's going to kick this flow off and it's going to say, all right, well, let's go ahead and create this account with the user ID, the entity, the identity provider ID. What you can also do is if you want to do any sort of like syncs and stuff, you can set something like that up. I would think for SAML, you probably wouldn't need to for Azure specifically. But you can also set up like a run flow on each login if you want to do something special each time a user logs in. But realistically, for SAML, you shouldn't need a job to continually run like each day like you would with Active Directory. Like the sync should happen each time that user logs in. And so that was what we would do with like a login flow is we could set something up to say, hey, each time this user logs in, let's reach out to the IDP and say, hey, have we had any new groups added to this particular user? Have we changed any permissions that they need to update in decisions?
Mhm.
And so say I log in, it's going to say, hey, Ethan's been added to the administrator group this time. We can configure this flow, which is empty by default, but we can configure it however you want to say, all right, let's go ahead and if this user is an administrator on the IDP side, we can just drag out a step to say, all right, go ahead and add them to the administrator group in decisions. So
Okay. Mhm.
that would mainly be the logic that you'd be looking for, like in place of Active Directory, is you could just run it on each login rather than like the one big job to run it, midnight every night or something.
Okay, got it. Because we have like a one form where the names come straight from corporate directory, right? And the
Mhm.
users can select them as a requester. So what happens, they will submit the form, and then if their account is not in decision since they have never logged in, how would they get an assignment? So that's why I did the scheduled job. So there is always an account of the user. You see what I mean? Like they can
Mhm.
even pick up any new person whose account probably is not even in decisions. How would decisions assign the assignment if their account is not even in there?
That's a fair point. Yeah, that's an interesting use case for sure. It's something that I haven't seen before, but yeah, I mean, we could still
Hmm.
creating a job like isn't completely off the table, and I don't want to say like, oh no, you absolutely shouldn't do it,
Hmm.
but in that essence, like if you do need somebody to have a specific user account, it's still definitely possible to create something like that.
Gotcha. Which one do you recommend more? Just like the log in from straight from the SAML and getting all the information from Azure, or do you think most people do? Which way do they do usually?
Typically, we recommend this way where we have a login flow set up to fetch that information from your IDP.
Okay, got it. And in that flow, you also do the update account. So for example, like if Jennifer comes in tomorrow and she becomes a director, so when she logs in, will it just automatically get updated too, or does it have to be updated separately?
It would need to be configured in this flow,
Mhm.
but if we jump in here, we'll have a couple extra. This is a special type of flow. So this is just a SAML login flow, and that's its specific behavior type. And what that means is, jump into my flow data here, we're going to have a couple additional fields that we wouldn't have normally in a flow. So we have the identity provider ID, we have the raw SAML response, we'll have assertion attributes, and this will be our big factor here. So what we can do is add these assertion attributes in Azure. So you'll have a place, and each IDP is a little bit different on how they word it, I've come to learn. But
Mhm.
you can add attributes that will come with the SAML response, which each time you log in, you're going to get that SAML response because the IDP is going to authenticate you. And part of those attributes, we can add the list of groups that they're in, or we can add, if they have like a last name or a different email or something, any sort of like account object that they have within the IDP. And so what we can do is we could set up a login flow that conceptually goes, hey, let's pull the group list from the assertion attributes after we've added them in there. And then let's parse through them with like a for each. And then each one that, each group that that user is a part of on the IDP, we can add them to a group with the same name and decisions, or whichever name you want.
Okay, and then every time it will run, and then it will just update by itself because you
Yeah,
have
so
that
each time the
configured.
user logs in, it asks the IDP if they've been added to anything, and if not, it'll just bypass them and they're good to go. And if they have, then it'll add them or remove them from those groups.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. Thank you so much, Ethan. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. All right, so it looked like Angel hopped in. So Angel, you had the pre-submitted question from earlier. So if I jump back here, let me pull up my other tab. And change the share.
Hello.
Hey there, how are you?
Running late.
It happens.
Did my question make any sense at all?
I think so. So I built a little example project, and maybe you can tell me, I hope I covered it correctly, but it looked like we had a data grid that was on a form, and we were having issues updating it each time we tried to run any sort of delete. So we had something that looked like this, and we were trying to select and then remove items. Not sure if you're still with me. Looks like you're off mute. All right. Are we back now? Looks like it.
Oh, I think we had to re-unmute her.
All right, now can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep,
there you
we
go.
can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I lost
Perfect.
you. Sorry. Did my question make any sense or no?
I think so. So I a little example project, and I'm hoping that this was what you were asking. If not, we can see if we can dig in a bit further. But it looked like you were having some issues where we had like a list of items that we had on a data grid like this, and we were
Mm-hmm.
trying to remove the items and just auto update.
Right.
Okay, perfect. So this is what I have set up. It's pretty quick. This is just a sub dialog button, which I think is what you had mentioned.
Yep.
And just for concept, like this is just to fetch entities. I created just a simple data structure. It's got a name, and then it's got just dates. So I'll go ahead and create just a couple more rows. And then if I jump back into my flow, this flow is going to fetch the entities from there, and then it's going to go ahead and throw them into this data grid form. So I have a sub dialog set up here. I also have use legacy set to false. And what this is going to do is this is going to treat the sub dialog very similarly to an active form flow. So I'm not sure if you've used those in the past at all. But active form flows have some additional behaviors that we can make use of, which is what I'm doing here. So if I jump in, easiest way to tell is if we have this form rules tab down here. And so a lot of these steps we can use, like if we want to just auto exit the form, we can set some validations. We can clear some validations, enable, disable, or we can just set values on controls themselves. So we won't use these steps in this particular scenario, but we will use some other things that come with this. So each time this user selects that sub dialog button, it's going to run this delete. And so what this delete does is, if you see here, we have access to the form data that's on the form itself. So all I do is just say, hey, I want to pull the form data from the data grid and then the selected item, and then it goes all the way down to pull that item ID. And then it goes ahead and runs that delete. And then we go ahead and refetch that after we've run the delete. And so we pull the data that we have already set up at that point. And after we've done the delete, we pull the data again. So we know that we're not going to have that one row. And then I just have a create data step that pulls that fetch entities output. And then on our output for this, it's just a list of the items that we have. I go ahead and do change value, and I change the value on the form data, and then we go into the data grid, and then we go to that item source. And so we just say, hey, we want to update the source of the items that's being displayed in that data grid. And that's how we get that refresh functionality. And so I can show that one more time as well.
Okay, so I am fetching the data from a report, well, actually, no, from a database, sorry, through an active form flow. And so there's another button that's utilized, and then it has the option to then you select and delete this particular record. And I'm doing that through the sub dialog. And I know it's deleted because if I hit that fetch button again, it'll update it, but it doesn't necessarily. So my thought was, well, then I just need to pull that particular sub dialog, or I'm sorry, subflow back into that that remove button, sub dialog button. That's, I think, kind of what you're doing here. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think the only thing, just based on what you're describing, the only thing I think we're missing is just that refresh where we change the value of the source of the data grid, all within that one. So we run the delete, then we refresh the values that we have in the database now, and then we do this change value. And so this is what's doing the actual refresh, and I think that's the step we're probably missing.
Okay. Okay, and then the other thing I noticed in that process, and maybe this will fix it when it refreshes, is when I then go to submit my form, select another record that's not been deleted, and then I go to basically finalize that form, it's throwing an error message.
Okay, do you know, can you read off the error message to me? I'm not sure if
it's telling me that nothing is must select. And I think it's related to that active form flow from the original fetch.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's
it's almost like it's two different things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm wondering is it like an actual error pop-up, or is it just giving you a validation when you try to submit the form?
A validation error when I try to submit.
And at the time, like, do we see that one row has been selected?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
But when it throws that validation error, it doesn't have that item selected, which is what makes me think that it somehow is like seeing two different data grids. But if I don't utilize that remove item and I just utilize the form otherwise, it still functions.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, like, maybe if when we run that remove item, it's missing. Like, we might just need to specify as well, like if we want to select a particular object. So this may be something that we'd have to review potentially in a support ticket just to
Okay.
get a more detailed explanation, but I'd be happy to submit that on your behalf and then we could check that out. I think it's still just something that we're missing where we just need to set something up to where we either need to point it to say, hey, like let's go ahead and change the value, because we can also change the value if I dig in here of the selected item itself. So maybe we could add something in that auto selects a particular row, or maybe the refresh could also resolve this if I'm thinking about this correctly.
Yeah, because I think what it needs to do is the refresh needs to pop up and then they need to select a different record to actually submit, because this obviously is removing that record, but we're trying to, in one form, allow them the ability to add, remove, and then ultimately select. And maybe
Gotcha.
that's where maybe I'm trying to do too much in one form.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying though, like, is absolutely possible. It's just a
Okay.
matter of, implementation. But yeah, we have access to change that selected item, and so we could do something there too, where we just say, hey, change the value of the selected item to whatever we need to do.
Okay. Okay. I figured I'd go this route first, and then if it needed to be, that we could do the support ticket. So
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to take a look at it here. Gave me a chance to actually build something out. I don't get to build that much on support. There's
I
a lot more
appreciate your help.
troubleshooting. Yeah, absolutely.
And that delete is where again? Where did you find
The
that?
delete step, it'll be located. So if we go under user defined types, I won't expand it just because I have a bunch of data structures in
Right.
here. But if you look for that particular data structure name, so in this case, it's just a simple data structure. If you find that and expand it, you'll have create, delete, selective update, update, and I think get all by
Okay.
default. And so
Okay.
each particular structure has its own associated delete. And so you can just drag that out.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So do we have any other questions before we hop off? Not seeing any in the chat at the moment. There's one. Can a validation be added to a header container on a form if a child text box throws a validation upon clicking on the submit button? So a header container, are we talking about like a tab container that we have set up? I can definitely check that out. So let's create a new folder here. So another form. I want to say that if we had like a tab container set up, that we should see something. Not a tab header container, gotcha. These I have not used quite as much. So I guess we'll find out together. Throw that up there. Let's throw our OK button. Type custom title. So can a validation be added to a header container on full child? So I guess just throw that in here. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've used a header container ever, now that I'm thinking about it. But let's say that this needs to be filled out. So we'll say, so for OK, it's required. We'll go ahead and run that. We'll see what it does by default. So OK, and we run. Yeah, so it looks like that's happening directly on the text box itself. I'm not sure if we could run it directly on the header. That might be more of something that we could do for a feature request, maybe. Because as I had kind of jumped towards the tab container because I do believe, and I can look at that later, but I do believe that a tab container will do that, where if we have like a tab that throws a validation, it'll highlight that tab as well. It doesn't look like it does that off a header container by default. So if I shrink this down a bit too. Can I add more to this? Or is it just, okay, it looks like it's just one. Yeah, but just after a quick look, it doesn't look like we have any way to define any sort of validations on this. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything on here. But yeah, I'd be happy to look into that as a potential feature request if that's something that you're looking for. All right, I will make a note of that. Did we have any other questions before we jump?
I think we are, I think we're good to call it there.
All right, yeah, sounds good. All right, I appreciate you guys joining. Thanks for all the questions. This was probably one of the busier lunch and learns I've done, so glad to have some action in here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, take care, guys.